Well, I'm joined by Leroy Rosenior. You've done it all when it comes to football, close to 40 years in the game.
Wow, 40 years.
40 years, Leroy, 40 years as a player, coach, manager and pundit. In that time, you've faced abuse and discrimination, both on and off the field. But for some time now, you've been using those experiences to fight for equality in the game. It's a pleasure to have you here with me. Thank you for joining me today. My first question is, let's go back to the beginning. What was your childhood like?
Well, I grew up in South London. The family home from where we live, we can see Brixton Prison. It's about 50 yards up the road. I've got 4 sisters, Lauren, Linda, Lorna, Lena, and I'm Leroy. My dad was a little bit eccentric about the L. And I had a wonderful upbringing. I'm the youngest, I'm the only boy. So if you can imagine, like 4 sisters who were very strong characters and mum and dad very strong characters. So I was protected from a hell of a lot. But in terms of my upbringing, it was inclusive, absolutely and totally inclusive. Looking back on it as a boy, we used to have family parties in the front room, and the neighbours were Polish, English, Scottish, and they used to come around for parties, and we had a wonderful time. So my upbringing, up until the age of 15, 16, when I had to go to work, was just, for me, I did it. We were poor, we didn't have a lot of money, but I was happy as Larry. Being around the area, going out to play, playing football, and it wasn't until I got to go to work that I had the problem. My dad always used to say to me, look, if you ever look at that prison up there, you know, if you ever get into trouble, that's where you'll end up. And that was a warning, and it was at the end of my road. So I never got into any trouble. And the problems really started when I started playing football.
When you joined Fulham, quite early on in your career, there was one particular evening match, I believe, where you really faced discrimination head on. Can you just take me through the incidents of that night?
Well, I was 17 years old. I'd only just signed a professional contract. It was an FA Cup game. And I was so looking forward to it. It's a massive club. It's a big club that we were playing against. And went out on the pitch, and from the first whistle, the 2 centre-halves just abused me, and it was like a tag team. It went one way, and one was calling my sisters this, and my mum was this, my dad was this, calling me names, calling me the M-word. And then at half-time, I'd kind of try to calm down. Second half, we went out, and they was doing exactly the same. And throughout that 90 minutes, I can't remember anything about that 90 minutes because I was so wound up about the abuse I was getting. And at the end of the game, one of them came over to shake my hand. I told them to F off, basically. And I was so angry that they'd done what they wanted to do to me. They'd abused me right through the game, and I hadn't taken part in the game. We lost the game. Lost the game 2-0. And I realised then that if I wanted a professional career, that I'd have to, not just put up with it, but I'd have to learn to handle it. And my dad had always said to me, look, in life, you have to pick your moments. You have to keep your powder dry. And when I say, you know, people say ignore it, that's not something that he never told me to ignore anything. He said, but you have to keep your powder dry and wait for the right time. So I did, and I learned how to deal with that because I wanted a professional football career. Fortunately, I had that. And the time when I could actually start talking about was when I finished playing. It wasn't until 20 years later because I could talk about that incident and tell people how I felt, how it made me feel, and realise that people go through that sort of thing on a daily basis, obviously in different, not on the football pitch, but in different environments, and how profound an effect it has on you as a human being.
It must have been hard, I mean, having to hold on to that for all that time.
It was and it wasn't, because I had a lot going on. It was something that it was always in the back of your mind, and it's amazing that when you, as a human being, when something really horrible or bad happens to you, you have this ability to kind of to deal with it in a way. I suppose it's always there, but to deal with it and to get on and to sort of, you think you're moving forward, like playing games, you know, scoring goals. You know, I went on to play many games and had a really good career, but at the back of your mind it was always there. And when certain things happened, you always went back to that moment. And it happened to me because, you know, as a professional footballer, you're supposed to be, you know, hard as nails, nothing touches you, you know. You don't get emotional, you know, you've got to be a man. That was always the saying, wasn't it? That, you know, got to be a real man.
What kind of toll does that take on your mental health, that perception of you can't show any weakness as a professional athlete dealing with what you were dealing with?
In terms of mental health, like no one was talking about mental health when I was playing. You know, no one was talking about the effects on you as an individual. You just got on with it. And if you wanted to play, you got on with it. if I had said something about it, the old thing would have come out, oh, you've just got a chip on your shoulder, you just got to deal with it, everybody else has got to deal with it. And to be honest, I had no understanding of it as well. I couldn't have talked about it, even if I'd wanted to at 17 to talk about it. One, I had no one to talk to about it. And two, I didn't really understand what was going on as well. I was learning about it because I was a young man. I had other things on my mind. I wanted cars, I wanted, to go out, I wanted to play football. So it was something I just put to one side. And in the end, it became something that was positive. I've met that guy since then. And I met him about 30 years after the incident in a television studio. And I hadn't seen him since then. But the first thing he said to me when I walked into that studio, he said, I wasn't sure how you were going to react to me because I remember the last time I played against you, what I did. And he apologised straight away without me opening my mouth. So not only did it have an effect on me, but obviously in his lifetime, he'd come to realise that what he did wasn't correct. And the first thing he said to me when I met him 30 years later was to apologise, put it all aside, and we got on. And we're not friends, or we're not great friends, but we put it aside and we got on with our lives.
I mean, following on from what you've just said there, after a few injuries, going back to your playing career and a few loan moves, you eventually did move to Bristol City in 1992, which I believe was your first move outside of London. How did coming to the West Country in that time compare to being in London, following on from what you've said about, mindsets?
I'll tell you what, it's amazing. I loved it. I signed at the same time as Andy Cole. So Andy and I everybody knows the Avon Gorge Hotel in Bristol. It's overlooking I lived in the Avon Gorge. They put me in the Avon Gorge for 6 months, which was, it was nice, but after 3 months it got a little bit boring. But it was Bristol is an amazing city, and it's an amazing place. So to come from London to Bristol was amazing in terms of the surroundings and the people. It was fantastic. But there were occasions when it wasn't so fantastic, because just down from the Avon Gorge there's a jewellery shop in Clifton, and Clifton is one of the nicest areas, in Bristol. Beautiful old Victorian Georgian houses. And Andy and I were walking through Clifton just because we had nothing to do. And there was a jewellery shop, and we were looking at the jewellery shop, and I went to walk into the jewellery shop, and the gates went, shoom, and boom, she shut the gates. And the woman behind the gate was absolutely petrified. And I don't know if she'd had a bad experience or someone who, of my colours, but I don't know what it was. But you realise then that there was a fear about, and then we looked around and realised that we were only two black guys in the street. And then it took me back to being in London, and you had to be careful, of how you behaved again. Because in London, I got stopped, because I had a nice car, I got stopped by the police millions of times on a regular occasions. And people go, oh, it's just people doing their job. But people don't understand that when that happens to you, when you walk into a shop, and I have to put my hands in my pockets to make sure that I'm not threatening anybody, I have to behave in a certain way so people don't think that I'm going to mug them, or because that's how it was a lot of the time. And then they realise that I was maybe back in that environment.
How does that make you feel, having to, put yourself in a shell, I guess, to protect other people?
It's something that my people have always done, and we've had to do to survive. In all honesty. And I have to say it to my kids all the time, and they don't understand a lot of the time that how people look at them is driven by the media. I look at newspapers, you look at newspapers, and the front page of newspapers, something's happened, there's been an attack, there's been a murder. The first thing I'm thinking is, oh, please don't be black, don't be black, don't be black. Because when I was in London, something happened, and a black person was maybe responsible for it. I knew when I walked out on the street, there'd be people crossing the road over me, thinking that I was that person. It certainly didn't happen on a white person that did something illegal. You didn't walk across the road. They didn't see people walking across the road from a white person. It's how people perceive you, and how their experiences, and how sometimes, a lot of the case, the media have driven this narrative where people who look like me have been the enemy. It's something that I've had to get used to all my life.
So as a footballer, especially back in the early 90s, with the limelight already on you as being a footballer, but I guess more so as being a person of colour, especially in the West Country, how did you deal with that?
It's fine for me, everybody knew me. So I wasn't black, I was Leroy the footballer. That gets me in. That gives it's people who didn't know me as a footballer. It's just a black person. There's a black person. People knew me. It's absolutely unbelievable. And still to now, I walk down there. I live in Bristol. I love it. I wouldn't stay here if I didn't love it. But people got to understand that if you don't know me as a footballer, the first thing, and you know, a lot of people say this thing about being colourblind. Oh, I'm colourblind. I don't see colour. But you know, it's not actually true. The first thing you see about a person is their colour. You haven't spoken to them. You don't know who they are. The first thing you see about anybody is their colour. And there are certain people who will embrace that and say, oh, where are you from? How are you doing? It's really nice to see you, as I would, seeing anybody, because that's what I want to find out about. And there's certain people who feel threatened about that because of what they've read in the media, what they perceive, you know, black people to be. So, you know, it's not about how I feel, it's about how they feel towards me. I deal with how I feel. I know how I feel. I know what I want to do. I want to influence people. I want a society where there's racial equality, and I'm doing everything I can. And to be honest, I don't channel any negative energy into knocking my head against a brick wall. I always channel it into where I can change people's perceptions in a positive way.
I mean, going back to focusing on your playing side or the football side of your career, you would eventually retire at Bristol and move into the coaching side of things. How important was your time at the Robins in terms of coaching to your career moving forward in management?
Well, look, it was massive. Because I had an injury at 24, I'd got my coaching badges early, and Dennis Smith gave me the opportunity to coach at the club, and I absolutely loved coaching. I loved it as much as playing, in all honesty. And while I was coaching and managing, I looked around, and there weren't any other black managers, there weren't any other black coaches. So at the back of my mind, I knew there was responsibility, but it's more responsibility to myself to be the best that I could be, and I wanted to be judged on equal terms to everybody else. I didn't want to be given any favours, and I wasn't. So I ended up coaching right through the year groups at Bristol City. Obviously, I was a caretaker manager at Bristol City with Tony Forthorpe and Dave Burnside, and we went to Wembley, and my son was at the club as well for a long time. But I ended up, you know, going to Merthyr, Gloucester City, and Torquay United. And I suppose it's some places people wouldn't expect a person who looks like me to end up. But I had some of the most wonderful times at those football clubs because the people at Bristol, people at Merthyr, Gloucester, Torquay, they love football. And when you talk about football, you see people's eyes light up, and it just brings people together.
So when you got the job at Torquay, which was your first role as a Football League manager, how did that feel? Because that was someone giving you the opportunity to show, I'm just as good as anyone else.
It was amazing because of the circumstances in which I got the job as well. I went for the interview a year before, and Roy McFarlane got the job. Roy McFarlane was an England international, played for Derby County. He was an absolutely wonderful footballer. And you know what? I came second to him. I was absolutely delighted that I came second, and the chairman told me that. So when Roy McFarlane was sacked about a year later, the chairman rang me up and said, do you want the job? Because he said, I was so impressed with your interview the year before, so he offered me the job. The key to that job, and I realised, I always tell this to young coaches, was my relationship between myself and the chairman. We had no money, we had nowhere to train, but myself and the chairman got on like a house on fire. And he supported me in everything that I wanted to do, which meant I could implement every single idea that I wanted to implement. Nothing was diluted. It was all my idea. I drove it, I coached it, I managed the players, because I didn't have any. And it was the best experience of my life because I had no one to dilute any of my ideas. The coach, the chairman just supported me in implementing those ideas. And the first year, I think we finished 8th or 9th. I signed one player and we got promoted the next season.
How did that promotion feel? Because it was like the last day, you were depending on other results to get you through. Last minute, you find out you're promoted. Just take me through how that felt.
Well, it started the game before. We played Rochdale in the penultimate game, and we drew 2-2 at home, and we thought we'd blown it. And so we went to Southend, not thinking that we were in the playoffs, in all honesty. My son was on loan. I'd got Liam on loan from Fulham, so he was in the side. And I remember the game like it was yesterday. We were 2-1 up, and Ruben Hazel, who was a centre half, and Ruben could be a little bit rash. And he made a challenge in the penalty box, and you know what? If there was VAR now, they would have given that penalty 10 times over, in all honesty. The referee went, play on. I thought, oh, there's something going on here. While we were playing the game, my chairman was on a cruise. He'd gone on a cruise, and he thought, because we thought we weren't going anyway, so he had the ship's radio wire, and he was sat next to, I think it was Huddersfield. Was it Huddersfield who we beat to promote? And he was sat next to a Huddersfield supporter in a massive ship. And we were listening to the result. It was at Cheltenham, and at Cheltenham was Coyote, who I had at Bristol City, and I can't remember his name. A right back who I had at Bristol City, and they were playing for Cheltenham. Went down to 10 men. It was 1-0 to Huddersfield, I think, and they equalised in 10 minutes to go or something. We got promoted. So I got pictures of me and my son. It's one of the best times of my professional career, if not the best time, because my son was with me.
It was such an amazing achievement, but unfortunately, the following season, you were relegated. How did that feeling compare to, the euphoric feeling the season beforehand?
It wasn't a surprise, because the day after we got promoted, I was so excited. I went to see the chairman. I said, right, what are we going to do? He said, I can't. We're going to lose money. I said, what do you mean we're going to lose money? He said, well, the police costs go up. The cost of the policing away fans goes up, and stewarding the ground goes up, and we haven't got any money. I had actually less money than I had in Division 3 because we had 2,500 fans. There was no way we were going to get any more fans. So I had less money. So what we had to try and do was, again, be creative. And so I found out about this striker called Akinfenwa, Adibaye Akinfenwa. And he plays at Boston, and I had to track him down. I found him, got him, and yeah, we did go down last day of the season, but we sold Adibaye for 170 grand, and he went to Swansea. So the chairman was happy. He was happy as Larry, because we went down last day, and the guy who we went down to was Danny Wilson, who was a good friend of mine. They stayed up. I think it was at Chesterfield. I can't remember. I think it was Chesterfield. And I rang Danny straight away, which said, well done, congratulations. It was football. It's really disappointing, but we'd done as much as we could. And so there was no need for me to be upset. And I said that to the players as well. Straight after the whistle, as dejected and down as they were, I was so proud of them, because to take it to the last game of the season without adding any players. In fact, we lost David Graham he went off to Leeds for 250,000. And adding one player and going up the lead, I was really proud of him. So when you do as much as you can do in the circumstances, you can't be disappointed.
So when you eventually left the club in early 2006, that must have been hard, having what you achieved and the vision you had for the club.
It was hard because I was burnt out, in all honesty. And I said to the chairman, I said, I think my time's done. He said, look, just give me another 3 weeks, see how you feel in the 3 weeks. And I did 3 weeks, and I said, no, I can't. I'm absolutely burnt out. I need a change. So we're still friends to this day, So it was a good way to go out on my own terms, and it was nice that I wasn't sacked, because as a manager, that's what usually happens. You get sacked. So it was nice that I left on my terms, and Torquay, just like Bristol, is an amazing place to live, but it's miles from anywhere. And you feel isolated at times. And coming from London and bringing up a young family again, I knew that I needed to get them into a place where it was less isolated, let's say.
Did you ever feel any pressure being part of the first significant wave of black managers in the English game?
The only pressure I felt was the pressure I put on myself to be successful. Because when you're in it, they talk about bubbles now, but that's what you are. And at a football club, you're in a bubble. You haven't got really time to think about how you're influencing anything outside of the result on a Saturday or the result on a Tuesday. Everything is geared towards getting a result in the next game. When I came out of it, at Torquay, I got in touch with, Show Racing and Red Car got in touch with me, and I started to tell these stories about what happened to me, and then realised that just what a profound effect it has had on people and can have on people.
I mean, you've since received an MBE for the work you've done in terms of fighting for equality. What does that mean to you?
Firstly, when the letter came through the door, I thought it was a joke. I thought somebody was playing a massive joke on me. Secondly, I had to think long and hard about it, because you can imagine my background is from Sierra Leone. My parents are from West Africa. Sierra Leone is the place. The capital's Freetown. That's the place where all the slaves were freed after being free from slavery over 200 years ago. And being a member of the British Empire, I'd always seen people turn it down because of that word, British Empire. My dad was no longer with us, so I spoke to my mum and I said, what do you think? She said, don't be ridiculous, make sure you take it. She said, because it means that things are moving forward. It's about moving forward after, you know, the awful history that we went through, that people recognise you as for the work that you've done, not because of the way that you look. And to be honest, you realise in this world you need to get things done, you need to use every tool that you have at your disposal, and having an MBE opens doors for you. So it was a great honour, it was a great day. My mum was supremely proud, as were my sisters and all my family. But I realised that having an MBE gets you through the door. And for a lot of people who look like me, we don't get through the door. And so I vowed that to use it in a really positive way to take the work forward, and it has. You know, it's just the way of the world, whether you agree with it or not. You know, a lot of people kind of associate me with being a player. A lot of people associated me with being the manager who was just in charge for 10 minutes at Torquay United. Now a lot of people associated me with having an MBE, and although personally it's nice to have, what it does, it opens doors for me and gets me to get things done.
Do you think things are better now than they were when you were playing?
Different. Things are different. What we're getting to now is that an understanding. I think that when things used to happen, people never understood or didn't want to understand what was happening. I think now when people see things happening to Raheem Sterling, you know, in the Premier League, they see things happening all around the world, people think, do you know what, that's not right. That's good, so that's better. But what hasn't changed is that we're not doing enough to educate people and to have an effect in areas where you can really implement change. And when I say that, I'm talking about governance in terms of leadership, in terms of pathways for young people who look like me at a young age to think that, yes, I can do that job, I can be that person. We're in the middle of Black History Month at the moment, and because why is Black History Month only taught for a month? You know, it should be a part of the history that's taught in schools. Maybe it's a small part, but it should be a part of history that's taught in schools right throughout the curriculum. So people who look like me know that people have been successful and can achieve amazing things and have achieved amazing things. So we are a long way from that, and not a lot of that has changed. You look at the statistics, how many black managers in the football, in simple terms, in the league. Well, there were 3 when I was there. I don't think there's many more than that now. And that applies throughout society. So in terms of real, proper change, no. But we are working on it.
I mean, your son, I understand, has aspirations to be a manager. He also played in the game as a professional. Do you ever worry about him having, you know, the experiences you've had while you were playing and while you were a manager?
Well, he has. He has. He's had the experiences that I had. He has the experiences that I had outside in society as well. And I can't worry about them because I actually made sure he's aware that they were going to happen. And so I knew they were going to happen. As my children now, I make sure that they know that it's going to happen and how they're going to. They've had it in school. They've had them in, you know, the schools that they go to. They've had, you know, incidents within their school when teachers have rung me and said, this has happened in their school. It's happening now to them on a regular basis. All I can do is prepare them and to make sure that they come out the other side after those incidents. So it's not a case of worrying about whether it's going to happen. It's about worrying to make sure that they are properly prepared to deal with it and deal with it in a positive way, as I've said. Now, he's a coach now and he wants to be a manager. There's loads of obstacles he's going to come across, and there's certain ways that he has to behave to get people to perceive him in a way that to give him a job or to give him an opportunity. And I always said to my children, you might have to work a lot harder to get the opportunity that someone else, but that's your problem. That's not their problem. You can't, there's no point moaning about it that somebody might get an opportunity who hasn't worked as hard as you. That's their life. This is your life. So you're in control of this life. You cannot control what's happening to other people. So control what you do. If you want something badly enough, you have to work maybe harder than someone who looks different to you. That's just a fact of life.
Is that fair?
Well, people can tell, it's not fair, but there's so many things in life that aren't fair, and they're out of your control. The only thing you control is what you do and how you do it. And there's people like me trying to make it more fair as we go forward. But when you're in it, you have to deal with what you've got to deal with at that moment in time. And if you don't, then it's only you who's going to suffer. And you've got to give it your best, and you've got to be focused on it. And sometimes it's for people like me to, as I said, when I was coaching, I didn't have time to think about all those other things because, you know, I was in the moment. And there's the people, young people like yourself, Alpha, to go do your jobs and to concentrate on doing the best job that you do. And for people like me, who's a parent and as an elderly person, to take that responsibility and make sure those pathways are there for you, because you haven't got time. I want you guys to focus on doing your job as well as possible, so no one can point the finger at you and say you're not doing the job properly. So maybe it's my responsibility now. I've had my life, I've had my career. There's loads of things I still want to do, but the most important thing I want to do is make sure that the pathway for people like you, my son, my children, is a lot easier than it was for me.
What have you made of the Black Lives Matter movement this year, with the focus that's been around that?
Black Lives Matter isn't a political thing. It's a human rights issue. And if anybody disagrees that, you know, that Black Lives Matter, then they're in the wrong place. I know people say, oh, well, white lives matter. Of course they do, but white lives have always mattered. Have always mattered. And that is absolutely 100% right. It's just that black lives haven't always mattered. And I could talk you through my history where 2 million people died on slave ships being brought over. No one thought anything about it, where, you know, black people were treated as dogs and treated inhumanely. I could talk you through recent history where in the Ku Klux Klan, where people like me were taken into forests and hung from trees and used as propaganda to make sure that people were white supremacists, and they thought it was absolutely 100% right, because history shows you that black lives has never mattered as much as white lives. I'm afraid it's a fact.
So what would be the one change you would bring in, not just to affect, you know, police necessarily, but would it be the football industry just overall?
There's lots of things I'd bring in, but there is one thing I would definitely bring in. And if I'm talking about, I'll say equality, not just racial equality, because I think having 4 sisters, it's all about equality. I see this tokenism, where people have a short list of people, and if there's a short list of 6 people, and if they put 1 woman and 5 men on it, they think, oh, that's a good thing to do. If they put 1 black person and 5 white men or 5 white people on it, they think that's a good thing to do. If they put 1 disabled person and 5 so-called able people on that list, I think that's good, that's equality. That isn't equality. And I come back to my point about what real equality. If you want a woman for the job, then you find the 10 best women and you give it to the woman. And if you want a black person to get the job, you find the 10 best black people and you give it to the black person. You want a disabled person to do that job, you find the 10 best disabled people and you give it to the best disabled person. And people say, well, that's positive discrimination. But you know what? Sometimes you have to balance things up. You have to balance things up, because to give people an equal opportunity, you have to give them a chance to get the job in the first place, not giving them an interview. So if you really want change, then you have to have positive discrimination. That's the only way to do it. It will not balance it up itself, because the people in charge will always pick someone who looks like them. If you're a white, middle-aged man, you'll most probably pick a white, middle-aged man. If you're a black man, you'll most probably pick a black man. But there's not many black men in those positions. There's not many disabled people in those positions. There's not many women in those positions. It will never balance it up if you just leave it to nature. So if you want things to change, and you really want things to change, then you have to have positive discrimination. And that would be the first thing that I do. That's from the top. From the bottom up, I'd say to people who are going, young kids who are going, they need to see that there is a pathway for them to do that. There's a chance for them to do that, because they see too often in their lives there is not that opportunity for them, so they go off in a different path. It needs to be clear and obvious that when they're young people, I'm not talking just for black people, I'm talking about disabled people, I'm talking about young girls, that there is a pathway for them to be successful in their lives. If they want to take it, that's up to them. They might have to work a little bit harder than everybody else. But if they don't, that's great. But there's got to be the choice there.
Leroy, once again, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No problem.